7th or 8th. Seminary on Sunday. We've had an amazing journey. It started with me just wanting to spend some time with my ministry sons and daughters at our church, and my ministry sons and daughters are part of Kingdom Fellowship, and it then evolved and credit to begin the process. Really didn't plan to go any further than that. It just kind of continued mushrooming until it has brought us to this point. And we are like incredibly excited because out of these 7 weeks, we have one more week. My brother, Dr. Jeffrey Guns, will lead us, and he's going to talk about sustaining preaching excellence over the year, sustaining preaching excellence. And so out of this has kind of morphed into something that we will announce at the end for those who would like to continue this journey or even jump in. Starting in July, we're going to do Seminary on Sundays as a certification on preaching. We are talking to a seminary about providing CEUs, and we will spend quality time dealing with the mechanics of every person who registers, their preaching and their approach to preaching, as well as monthly presentations. We have Dr. John Kinney, we have Dr. Carolyn Knight, Dr. Jared Carter, Dr. Claiborne Lee, Dr. Christopher Davis. We're trying to confirm Dr. Gina Stewart for the first semester, the first 6 months. We already have 11 persons. We've registered at least $50. It's amazing. And so if you want to join us, it's going to be incredible. I don't care if you've been preaching 50 years, to be able to sit with these kinds of voices every week, every month, it's going to be incredible. So with that, who he is. And I say that with the utmost respect. I get to call him one of my dearest friends in the world. I do. But more importantly, he's probably one of the most respected preachers today. His voice just makes sense to a lot of us. And in terms of his approach to preaching and the excellence by which he sustains, it is unmatched in our generation. So I'm excited to have Dr. William Curtis on today. And the approach is going to be a little different for those who have been getting on every week. It's been presentations. He wanted to kind of change it a little and kind of turn it into more of a conversation. And so that's what we're going to do today. And so if everyone will of course mute their devices if you haven't already, I want to say welcome, Dr. Curtis. Thank you for taking time to do this.
Thank you, my friend. Honored to do it and been blessed by all the preceding weeks that you've been offering this, and thank you for the boldness to do it, particularly in these times.
Well, it's been encouraging for me to see the types of persons who've been willing to come on and to share insights and to share their wisdom. I know Dr. Carter's on today, and I believe Dr. Credit is probably on. If she's not on, she will be. And so there are so many persons who are interested in hearing your voice today and your insights and wisdom on preaching. So we'll begin from the very beginning. Just kind of share with us your call story, your call experience, how you've gotten to where you are, what has influenced your approach, and what influences you even today as a preacher.
So I was 15 years old singing in a high school choir. A gospel music instructor at the Woodlawn Middle School asked me to start leading devotions for that choir on a weekly basis. And that led me to a Thursday engagement for the choir at New Psalmist Church. And the first time I heard then Dr. Walter Thomas preach I was mesmerized by his preaching, and my curiosity kept driving me back to that sanctuary week after week. I was dating then my girlfriend, who later became my wife, and I was amazed at the wedding of theology and social justice. I was amazed at the poetic approach that I was hearing, because that was back in the day when language mattered and keeping suspense mattered and not releasing tension until later in the sermon mattered. So I was just spellbound by Walter Thomas's preaching. And 2 years into having joined the Psalmist, he engaged a group of young adult African American men specifically. It wasn't to the exclusion of women, but he was himself pulling this group of young African American men who had become curious at the same time and who were around the same age group, and formed a discipleship group for us. And out of that discipleship group, the kind of material that was dealt with started exploring what you would spend your life doing if you had to do it for free. And if there was no remuneration attached to it, what could you do for free? Married to the whole discipleship model of one-to-one evangelism. And out of that, several of us acknowledged the call to ministry. I preached my initial sermon at 17, and much to my surprise, he then extended the invitation for me to come on staff at New Psalmist. I was training to become a computer programmer and was working summers interning at a healthcare organization as a computer operator. And that the owner of that company had promised to send me to school and the whole 9 yards. But anyway, I left there, went on staff at New Psalmist, and served as one of the assistants until I was 22, and then was called to my first church in York, Pennsylvania, the Shiloh Church. Spent 7 years there, and then received a call to Mount Ararat in Pittsburgh, and I've been here for 24 years. And there have been probably a handful of preachers who significantly impacted my early stages of understanding what I consider to have been excellent homiletics. One, of course, was Bishop Thomas. Just the consistent week-to-week examination of scripture and the want to empower disciples to practically live out faith. And his sermons were very practical. It was almost like he always concentrated on the sitz and Laban, the so what of the text. But then for revival every year in the month of November leading up to Thanksgiving, I would get to hear Dr. Charles Edward Booth. And I'd never heard such anchoring in prophetic and social justice issues. And he was, for me, spellbounding in his history and wedding that to theology and then moving that to practical realities. When I was pastor of my first church, I was invited into the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta for the Gardner C. Taylor listening room unveiling. And I went to lunch with a group of guys who introduced me to the need to have windows, metaphors, and illustrations in preaching. And that had not been a part of my early development homiletically. And so I was listening intently to how they were describing what they felt was sound biblical preaching and how to articulate it in windows and metaphors that help to make it more understandable and palatable. Converge all of those things with what I later developed as a search for tension, which I'll talk about in a little while. And that produces the 53-year-old preacher that I am now. And then it's preaching to the same people every single week and changing around models and styles and trying different models and styles, since you have to preach to the same people every single week. And I treat the pulpit ministry like an athlete with a season. I try every season to focus on something that I don't think that I'm as strong at as I am in another component of preaching in a previous season, whether it's an introduction, whether it's holding tension, whether it is angles of exegesis, whether it is voice and pitch, whether it is engaging the conversation, whatever it can be that helps you to perfect the craft. I try to focus on something every single year and spend the year working on those things, conclusions, titles, and the list can go on and on. So that's kind of been what my journey for preaching is. And then listening to peers. So I heard you the first time at New Psalmist for a Saturday men's event, and I think that was the first time we met. And I sat up in that balcony before either I had to preach or I had preached and was getting ready to leave, and heard you. I was in Morristown, New Jersey, preaching around the corner from Jerry Carter in Revival. Can't remember the name of that church now, and I remember the pastor's name, Joseph. Can't remember his last name, but at any rate, Jerry Carter was sitting in the congregation, and then Dr. Booth said to me when I was at Simultaneous Revival in Columbus, I needed to hear him. I was introduced to Claiborne Lee by us both being selected to be a part of the same doctoral cohort. Derek Triplett introduced to him through you, I think, Rudy McKissick, and the list could go on and on and on. And listening to the sharpened iron of colleagues made me want to also make sure that I was sharpening the tool and the gift in my own life, because iron does sharpen iron. And I think the best way to improve your homiletical skills, we will call it, is to challenge yourself to be surrounded by people whose homiletics not only you admire, but who can push you to multiple levels and to want to be better.
Wow. Okay. So let's go back, because it's interesting, Bill, how, you know, and I'm gonna probably sound older than I really am, but it's interesting how in oftentimes the person's, you know, as you talk to preachers today, we talk about influences. Oftentimes our influences are not those historical voices anymore.
Right.
So why is it important to be connected to those historical voices, but also to peers that you perceive or that you identify can be impactful in your own preaching style and journey?
So I listen to all preaching first as a Christian, right? And because I'm listening to preaching as a Christian, before I start doing the evaluation of, man, that was a great introduction. It lasted, 3 minutes, but it didn't take away from the transition, and the transition didn't take away from the moves and all that kind of stuff. Oh, the illustration matched. The person was nautical in the text. They were nautical in their illustrations. They were nautical in their celebration. They were nautical in their conclusion. How tight that sermon is to have kept us in the water, as opposed to a sermon that takes us to the mountain in the text, down to the valley in the introduction, across the chasm in the transition, and we end up all over the landscape until you forget that we were on the boat with Jesus and the disciples. So it's listening to guys who take homiletics, guys and girls, and I want to make sure that I'm very inclusive today, because I grew in Psalmist with male and female preachers as peers. So Leah White and I kind of rode this train of ministry together. So it's listening to clergy persons whose skills speak to you as a Christian first, and then who you see work their craft. And there are a group of peers who I just like to see them work their craft, because I know their personality and I know how serious they are about preaching. And I like to see them do what they do. I like to see how they angle into a sermon, and to how they are engaging the process of maturation. And it was important for us coming up that successful models be listened to and emulated. There's nothing new under the sun, right? So if you had relationship with pastors and clergy mentors who were successful, all of us sounded like them when we began. And then over the course of years, as we matured, we found our own voices and came up with our mutated modalities, and began to develop enough confidence and a mindset of authority for where we were in life and in the practice of the skill of preaching, that we felt that we could now offer what we thought were our spins and unique twists with regards to homiletics. But it started out with who impressed you and who inspired you and who motivated you and who sharpened you and who challenged you and who convicted you. And you duplicated and replicated them. And As you grew, you realized their voice could not be the voice sustainable for you. You shed some of that and started to find your own voice. And I think that model is still very much needed for pulpit ministry now. I am very concerned when I hear either one of my sons and daughters or younger clergy persons engage conversation with me with conversation like, I know God has called me to be a unique voice in the kingdom. I know what they mean by unique. But part of what they mean by unique is I am to do this thing in a way that nobody else has ever done it. Humorously, I was preaching somewhere where somebody said, God didn't call me to preach proclaiming the word of God. God wants me to preach through dance. Hey, bless your spirit. But faith comes by hearing, and hearing comes by the word of God. And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach unless they be sent? So for me, it was important to take seriously when people wanted to invest in me and to duplicate, replicate, imitate those models until I got to a place, stage, age where it was important for me to shed those voices and to develop my own.
Okay, so now let's get into the nuts and bolts. I think you've been laying a phenomenal foundation for us in terms of your philosophy and understanding of preaching and your unique journey, which, you know, years ago when I was working on my D-Min, I was worst D-Min student ever at School of Theology, but at least I finished. Praise God for that. But I read this book entitled Recalling Your Story. And it really began to reinforce for me the importance of retelling our story as men and women called to ministry. So that gives incredible insight as to who you are today. So in terms of your looking at preaching, what is your definition of preaching and what is your definition of a sermon? Now, interestingly enough, you know, when I've done, you know, trainings and that kind of thing as it relates to preaching, I use I use the definition you gave me 5 years ago. And I could go back and find it, but that definition has been a part of how I've helped to train and teach and prepare other preachers. So give us your definition of preaching and then your definition of a sermon or an effective sermon.
So I've followed Philip Brooks that preaching is biblical truth through personality. That's number one. That's foundational. And then for me, preaching is communicating the gospel in such a way that it leads a listener to make a decision for Christ, period, right? So those are my simple definitions of preaching. H. Grady Davis is my encyclopedia for the definition of preaching. H. Grady Davis says, a sermon starts in the Bible, stays in the Bible, finishes in the Bible. And based upon that foundation, you interpret it one of many ways. You can shape that sermon as a question asked, as a statement made. You can shape it as a diamond inspected, meaning we turn it in its varied facets and look at its brilliance from different angles based upon the shining light of the redemptive work of Christ on Calvary. You can a doctrine that is being espoused. Those things don't change. So for me, biblical preaching is first and foremost theological. And when it does not have its foundation theological, whatever derivation of it a proclaimer thinks he or she has, I don't necessarily qualify that as a sermon. Great speech, inspirational, motivational, but for it to be a sermon, it is first theological. And let me tell you what I mean by this, because this is very interesting just based on the conversation we had with Cynthia and Courtney on Thursday. I fully understand trying to dive into a character in the Bible, trying to look at what gender was speaking, trying to look at what one tribe was saying to another. I'm with all of that. But understand that the Bible in its most basic form was written to reveal the character of God as God engages the nation of Israel, and Israel retells her story as she engages her relationship to God, and what ethics, doctrines, theology they develop as they engage that relationship. So that I go to every text first with that foundational belief. What is God revealing about God's self? That's first and foremost. And I think that is more important than, so for example, and we were laughing about this on Thursday because Courtney was making the humorous point that the first proclamation from the empty tomb was the announcement coming from women. And that, you know, that meant women were really the alpha version and we were the beta version. And, you know, we laughed about that. And I understand the need to build those bridges for gender promotion and gender strength. And the same would hold true as we interpret certain texts as it relates to our Afrocentricity and all of those kind of things. But when you're talking about coming from an empty tomb, the very first priority is not who was communicating that the tomb was empty. The first priority was that Jesus wasn't in there. That's the priority of that story. It's empty, just like he said he would. That becomes the central focus, and then everything else has to have its tributary connectivity based upon that one foundational understanding, right? So for me, every text is first interpreted theologically. This past weekend, I was looking at John chapter 1, verse 5, when John tries to do this comparison of Jesus as light. And he makes this wonderful little statement, John, which is where I get the whole tension motif. He makes this wonderful little statement. In Genesis, light is separated from darkness. And then Israel grows to attribute goodness and virtue and righteousness and everything godly to light, and wickedness and satanic intention and that which is opposite of good is attributed to darkness. And there is this Old Testament motif where it is separated. But then John comes along in John chapter 1, verse 5 and says, Jesus is light in the darkness. So while I'm trying to wrestle with my congregation regarding that, it dawned on me that if we stay theological, why can't I have a total separation of darkness in my life? Dark thoughts, dark actions, dark motivations, dark relationships, dark seasons. How come I can't go to a place in my spirituality where God can separate me from everything that is this dark reality in my life? Well, you can't, because darkness is a theology. Darkness is primordial. It was here before we were. It is out of darkness God says, let there be. So what John is really doing theologically is saying, stop trying to get rid of darkness, because that's going to be a demotivator. That's why we end up feeling like we can never be a mature Christian, because we know trying to follow Jesus, we still have these dark moments and dark thoughts. And Paul tried to allude to it when he says, when I would do good, evil is always present. So I engage my congregation around this tension. How does it sound for you if I were to say to you, you can't get rid of darkness, but when Jesus brings the light of his brilliance into your life, it's your choice as to which one you will let dominate? Just from engaging the text theologically first. Now, I don't have to run to, you know, this is going to help you pay your bills off and this is going to heal you of all your infirmities. And, you know, if you buy into this and just say light 10 times, money's coming to you by the time you get to the parking lot. So these things happen when you engage the text first theologically. Your very first question is, what is God revealing about God's self, either doctrinally, narratively, parabolically, metaphorically. I don't care what platform you take after that, but it has to start with where is God in the text and what is God trying to reveal. Is that answering the question you were asking?
Absolutely. So, and since you've mentioned it several times, I want to just kind of follow this train of thought. First of all, you're great to have a conversation with. I appreciate you, because you are stretching. You are teaching while talking, which is an actual incredible gift. So, what do you mean when you say tension in the text or the tension of the text? Because you refer to that several times. So, Bill, what does that mean?
Okay, so I read the Bible, I engage the Bible as a book of tensions. God stepped into darkness, void, and said, let there be. What's the tension? Darkness against light, God's creative imagination against the void that was existing prior to his articulating of his creative imagination. And then from everything from Adam and Eve to Cain and Abel to Abraham and his wrestling with having to sacrifice Isaac and on and on and on, in every text, there is some tug of war that I call tension. And if a preacher wants relevance with their preaching, regardless of what they are preaching, identify the tension in the text, and it keeps you from, since most of the people in this call are clergy person, it keeps you from only identifying what the person in the pew could easily identify. We're called to mine the field deeper. We're called to take the text at a deeper level. And for me, if I can always identify the tension in the text, I never miss landing on some form of tension, whether it is God's will versus human will, whether it is God's demand for righteousness versus my flesh want for wickedness and carnality, whether it is my blackness versus the dominant culture's racism, whether it is the crucial conversation that we have to have in terms of gender and sexual orientation and age, whether it is what God is saying in pandemic times, rather than these easy declarative statements that make some people feel like, well, I'm elitist because that's where I am, and other people feel like I'm defeated and I'll never get in because I can't match up to that. I try to identify what's the conversation from the middle. And for me, the text always gives me some opening that helps me to identify the tension, where I really do want to do what God is asking me to do, but sometimes I'm not the prodigal son returning home. Sometimes I'm the eldest son who is really ticked off that God is providing grace to somebody who didn't stick around and do the right thing. And the tension for me is, how do I handle that just staying home and attempting to honor my father doesn't always mean the party is thrown for me and the fatted calf is killed for me and the robe is seized for me and the ring is given to me. That seems unfair. So the tension for me is, how do I appropriate a God who throws a party for the brother who left and never throws a party for me who stayed? And God knows that's what happens in life. I work on my job where me and my coworker in the cubicle next to me can have the same performance review, but my coworker gets the elevation and I don't. And I fasted and I prayed and I paid my 10% and I participate in a cell group and all that. And yet my coworker seems to get all the elevation. How do I appropriate that? Unless we deal with, God is not always fair, but God is just. And the tension is, can you love a God who's just when he's not always fair? Because that's where people live. Black people are disproportionately affected by coronavirus. And and we're disproportionately affected by the decisions that are being made by President Trump and everybody else who is forced to be his yes men or yes women. So the question we have to ask God is, after all that we have to deal with being Black in America, we know you're just, but this just doesn't seem fair that I got to stay home for 3 straight months. And then when they want to reopen, now they want to reopen churches because the economy needs to be re-stimulated. You know, God is not fair. He's just, but he's not fair. And I've had to learn to love him for being fair, for being just when he's not always fair. Does that kind of explain the tension motif?
Yeah, and I want to take it a little further because I think that so do you ascribe to the dialectic method?
I do.
Okay. What is your use of that method in sermon development? Because interesting,
So
I think that first of all, go ahead.
Here's the best way to define it. So for me,
okay,
where many preachers will go thesis, antithesis, synthesis, or some, variation of that, for me,
sure.
I want to hang out in the spaces in between. Does that explain
Gotcha.
it? Yeah,
yes.
I want to identify the space in between. So here's the thesis, here's the antithesis. But the ephesis says nothing about life is ever on the complete side of the thesis or on the complete side of the antithesis. And this is what happens when they do these studies with Myers-Briggs and these personality assessments, where I'm a ISTJ, right? But in each one of those, I am more predominantly towards the exclusive side of that than in some other of those traits, right? And I think the same thing happens with the text. It's not always this straight either or. I think sometimes where many of our members are is in that middle gray area in between. So it's that Selah that the psalmist talks about, that often we find God in that breathing in between. And I'll give you another perfect example that I think everybody can resonate with in pandemic times. The number one question everybody keeps asking is, what is God saying, right? And what should be our strategy for reopening? That's great. On the one side, what is God saying? On the other side, what should be our strategy for reopening? But you and I know, John, we live in this middle ground of, I'm scared. And I don't even know if I want to know what God is saying. And I want to admit that I have absolutely no clue about what the strategy for reopening is going to be. And for me, that meant I had to settle into where the psalmist says, it's okay if you can't be on praise, and if you're not all the way on the other side where you want to curse God, you can be in the middle where it's okay just to lament, right? Just to say, God, I mourn this. I mourn this whole season. I'm in the space in between. And that's where more people live, in the space in between. If you can speak to the spaces in between, I don't care if you call it tension or however you term it, if you can speak to the spaces in between, you never miss relevance.
So, okay. So moving from there, now the bigger question for me becomes, define for us your approach to developing a sermon. From the moment that every week you got approach, right? Define that approach to get from beginning to the actual preaching or the presentation of the sermon. What does that approach look like?
All right, I'll do it in probably laborious detail. So I am a Walter Thomas son who taught me all sermons come from a devotional life. That when you go to the Bible in search of a sermon, you more often than not are going to force one and not find one. So my sermons are born out of devotions, right? So because I'm not innately gifted as other preachers are, I have to make up for the shortage that I sense in my life by discipline. So I have determined from day one, I may not ever be as innately gifted and talented as some other preachers, but nobody's ever going to outwork me. So I'm going to get up Monday morning.
Stop. Say that again, because I think you tapped in to something. And, you know, I did want to break your train, but I think that most preachers are spending, because I'm watching smiles. I'm watching people kind of go, whoa. William Curtis, Dr. William Curtis just made a statement, because, you know, people think that, like, you're like one of the best preachers in America, right? So, I mean, I do drop your name, like, to say, you know, like, hey, who's your friend? Oh, Bill Curtis. So, right?
Whatever.
I was going to sell T-shirts when you were president, but I couldn't get a good picture of you, so I didn't. So, you know, but anyway, forget all that. So, go back and make that statement again, because I think that, truthfully, I think too many preachers put the weight on being anointed, and they think anointing is waking up and getting revelation and opening their mouth and going, oh God, I just said something nobody else said. William Curtis just said that you do work, that you made a commitment to do what?
Yeah, you have to exercise discipline. So here's how I listen to preachers who, and I know it's probably a fallacy, but it's the way I think, and I guess it makes me competitive. I listen to preachers who, when I listen to them, they have some innate abilities that I have never been able to exercise. I was blessed and or cursed with a deep voice. So hooping was not innate to me, right? My hoop sounds like an opera singer trying to tune up at the National Baptist Convention. It's just ugly, right? So when I used to listen to others, I would say, well, I don't have that. I would listen to some people who, if they didn't have hooping ability, they had singing ability. I'm great for standing in the tenor section and keeping a song going, but I'm not a great worship leader, right? So I learned early on, where there is the absence of innate ability and innate talent for preaching, you have to make up the difference in discipline. So for me, I may not ever have the raw talent that other clergy persons have. I see my little brother, old Jermaine Simmons, on. He came out the womb hooping. I mean, he can just flat out hoop, right? When you know you can't do it, you got to make it up in other ways. So I make it up in discipline. So nobody's going to outwork me. And that's kind of been my mindset. Nobody's going to outread me. Nobody's going to outwork me. And for me, that meant if I had colleagues who, when I used to listen to them and they'd say they'd be working on their sermon on Thursday, well, that meant I had to start working on my sermon on Tuesday. If they said they were working on their sermon on Tuesday, that meant I was working on my sermon on Monday. If you told me you was working on your sermon while you was preaching the one you preaching now, I'm going to start working on my next sermon before I start writing my last one, right? Because it's just, that's how I shape my competitive nature. So Monday morning, 4:30, I am up. I believe that you are at your best before the noise of the world starts. Now, some people can do it on the complete opposite. 11 o'clock at night, God ain't getting much out of me. 4:30 in the morning, he has my undivided attention. I am not thinking about my staff. I'm not thinking about colleagues, mentees, surrogates, responsibility. My family doesn't get up that early. So 4:30 to about 9 o'clock, me and God can have our time. How does that go? I am having my devotions. If something jumps out of my devotions on that Monday that looks like it is begging me to preach, and that's how I identify what for me needs to be preached, a text keeps talking. It keeps raising awareness that makes me keep investigating. It keeps raising questions. It keeps begging me to look at it one more time. A word keeps rising that resonates. And then I just go with it. I engage it. And then my very first level of what I would call sermonic, on the way to sermonic proclamation, is I would just write whatever comes to my mind, sane or absurd. I just write it, whatever it is, because all I'm doing now is hanging out in the environment of the text. If it is down at the beach, I'm imagining what else could be a part of the scene. If it is in the temple, what else could be a part of the scene? I wonder how this conversation was heard by those who were eavesdropping. I wonder what it meant for people to walk by and see Jesus, entering into the temple, whatever, those kind of things. Just smell the aroma, listen to the conversation, imagine what the crowd may look like. What would a person who is trying to exercise obscurity think if they walk into this environment? And what would a person who is needy for attention think? All of those things you begin to investigate as you walk around the terrain of the text. So the first level of note taking is just whatever comes to mind. Then I'll go back and now I want to start employing my theological reflection. What is God trying to reveal out of this text? I've been hanging out in this environment, looking at walls, and grass, trees, and wood, listening to the conversation. Where is God in this text, and what is God trying to reveal? Where I find that, now I want to see what of all my observations survives the scrutiny of being connected to how I am approaching God's self-disclosure this week. And the reason I term it that way is because all your material is relevant for a sermon. It may not just be relevant for this sermon. So you want to make sure that you have a notebook of points, ideas, textual interpretations, theological gleanings, illustrations that could be married to it, where it fits in doctrinal categories, where it fits in institutional understanding, where it fits in prophetic and social lenses. However you divide and catalog your note-taking, be strategic about how you delineate is the word I'm looking for. Be very detailed as to how you delineate your note-taking so that when you have to refer back to it, you don't have to read all your notes to find the one slither that you're looking for. And that's what Joe Gregory talks about when he says you have to be kind of your own librarian and come up with your way of codifying your note-taking so that you can refer to it at any time and it be relevant. The worst thing in the world is to remember you have an illustration somewhere in your house and can't find it when you're at the end of your sermon, and then you have to go and attack something that's not relevant because you couldn't find it. So find a way and make that work. Monday night before I go to bed, I'm starting to invite that text to hang out with me on Tuesday morning for intimate time. So I'm going to sleep on it. So I'm going to read the text again. And while I'm sleeping, if I have those moments where I wake in the middle of the night, can't go back to sleep, I'm starting to figure out, how could I shape this? How can I have integrity with the theological disclosure that God is trying to reveal? What of my observations and notes could survive and what is going to have to remain for another sermon? And then Tuesday morning when I wake up, I'm soft outline. Soft outline for me is title, one dominant sentence, that is the kind of the so what or the identification of the tension of the text for me. And then I start mapping out how I want the journey to go. Do I want to start right in the text? Do I want to start with a statement a theologian made about the text? Do I want to start with a story that is going to be a bridge for me into the text? Do I want to start with a personal illustration about how I engage the text? You know, sky's the limit as to how you do that, but there has to be an entry point, and the entry point cannot dominate the theological disclosure. So here's my observation of a whole lot of preaching. To me, there is a lot of preaching where illustrations and practical disclosures are more weighted than what ought to be the central theological disclosure, which means I left more celebrating my human strength than God's intervention, his power, his revelation, him saving me from a perilous situation or pulling me back from the edge. And I should never disengage a text where I'm feeling so great about myself to the exclusion of the greatness and the majesty of God. So I try to work all of that out. Tuesday afternoon is the creation of that now hard outline, The hard outline is going to have blocked material. It's going to be blocked in ways where now I'm in more descriptive form about how I'm entering the text, how I'm transitioning the text, what the moves in the text are going to be, what theologians am I going to be quoting, what scholars, what poets, what authors, what literature. Am I, in this sermon, am I going to remain integrous to the geography, to the conversational temperature, to the engagement between characters, to the crisis that has created the engagement in the text? And whatever I'm deciding I'm going to hang the narrative on, I don't give myself permission to go outside of that for the rest of the sermon. That to me is the distinction between mediocre preaching and great preaching. To me, mediocre preaching can have you dealing with marriage, finance, deliverance, healing, all in the same sermon. And I leave out of it schizophrenic. As opposed to, if we're going to deal with this sermon on personal discipleship responsibility, then let's keep it there. If we're going to deal with this on evangelism and our outreach, expansion of the kingdom to persons who are lost, let's leave it there. And if we do that, then all my illustrations, all my transition, and my theological quotes have to have integrity with that same thematic thrust and focus. Cut me off if I'm talking too long. So that's Tuesday afternoon. Wednesday morning, that manuscript, first draft, final draft is done. Now, I want to say this for the comfort level of people on the phone. My church, after 24 years, has freed me to maximizing what is of greatest benefit to them. That's my homiletics. So they let me shape my counseling and my meetings around what is best for me for sermon development. Everybody's pastor is not like that. Some people pastor churches that require office hours. They require a certain amount of meetings and conferences. This may not work for you. Some are bivocational and they got to work a job and that schedule may not work. So this is me, because I'm the one being interviewed and in conversation today. My church frees me because they benefit more than anything else I bring to the ministry table, the homiletics. So the inordinate amount of time for me during the week is spent on my sermon. Now, it makes sense to me pastorally and homiletically, though, because 99% of your people, you're only going to be able to get at the one time that you have a chance to communicate with them. You got to take that serious. Don't give the excuse that the inordinate amount of time of your week was spent doing other things for 10% of your congregation, when the other 90% are going to come to hear you on the weekend, and now they've got to get the residue of your fatigue because you gave everything you had in terms of energy to the 10% of the congregation that you gave an inordinate amount of time to at the beginning of the week. So I spend more time on homiletics than anything else. The other part of that is my media team needs my sermon by Wednesday, so they can formulate everything from songs and words and slides and everything that has to happen with sign language people and the like. So that's my schedule for how I go from initial idea to final presentation. Wednesday, when I finish, I don't touch it and I don't look at it on Thursday. I re-engage my first set of edits on Friday, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon. And it's amazing how my other personality on Friday starts to question the personality I wrote it with on Tuesday, and I let them get into an argument. And sometimes the argument goes like this: what in the heck were you thinking? Where were you trying to go and what were you trying to say? Who are you? Right? And sometimes Tuesday's ego comes back and says, no, I'm going to defend what I said because that's where I was then. And that's where the congregation is going to be this weekend. And even though you want to change my direction, I'm going to stay where I am right now. Saturday morning, I get up for a final read. I transfer it to the iPad. And Saturday night, it's getting preached. And once I do that, I am not the person who goes back and makes edits Saturday to Sunday, because I want the whole congregation to hear the same sermon, same form for the weekend so that they can have discussions about it during the week.
Okay. I now feel convicted, so I'm writing tonight. Thank you very much for that. Right.
But you're innately gifted. And see, here's what I'm talking about. I think it's important to say this, John.
So not.
You have the ability to, in an extemporaneous way, order your thinking while you're talking. I don't have that capacity. I need to think about stuff. If somebody asks me a provocative question, you can answer immediately. I need to ponder that for a moment. And I need to ask myself some internal questions and shape my response. Well, the same thing happens for me sermonically. I need Monday through Thursday because I have to let it do so much filtering. I have seen you stand when somebody has taken your text preceding you, and you stand open the Bible to a text that perhaps you preached before, and you can download that information and run with it. I don't have that capacity. So you don't have to feel convicted. You can wait till Saturday like you've been doing.
You know, first of all, because you're one of my best friends, I will talk to you when we're done. So, first of all, the feedback we're getting, this is amazing. This is an amazing conversation. I should be charging people right now for this conversation, right? I do want you to be a blessing to him. He's given us some incredible insight and information, not only in the way he thinks about preaching, but in his approach to preaching. Which, interestingly enough, and I'll say this as we get ready to ask the last two questions, most of us preach but don't know how we do it. We just start writing and we end up in the pulpit on Sunday or Saturday or whenever. The fact that you can talk through the process is important in the education of those who are assigned to you, but also to a generation that needs to hear that. So with that stated, what do you perceive, Bill, to be some of the challenges you see today as it relates to the preaching craft?
So I'm going to go back to what I started with, lack of theological integrity from the beginning. That where there is absence of the want for theological integrity, sermons take on great form and articulation, but I'm not so
Okay, he's frozen, so he's gonna unfreeze himself in a minute. I've been asking for his Cash App, so we need to figure out, for those that want to Cash App him, how to do that, because we definitely want to be a blessing to him. And so we're kind of hoping we can get this unfrozen. Okay, he dropped. Okay, so what needs to happen is that we need to try to figure out how to get him back on when we're up to 100. Oh, you are good. Okay, perfect. All right, keep going. You good, Bill? All right, that's the challenge with technology, but we're gonna hold on because I think we're in the middle of something very powerful and very incredible. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in, and again, let's see if we can't get him back on.
Am I back in?
Yes, you are. Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. So
Yeah.
theological integrity, that's the point I was trying to make. I think that much of pulpit preaching today is human-centered and not theologically centered.
Wow. Okay. So if how do we correct that? I mean, I know that you've dealt with some some of that already, but how do we correct that? Because if, and I agree with you, and I've even been guilty. I'll even suggest that I'll even acknowledge I've been guilty. How do we correct that? In your estimation, how do we correct that?
Those of us who are attempting to be responsible preachers have to hold others to accountability. And we've got to not celebrate falsely what we know is not integrous preaching. We can't do it. We just can't do it. We can't promote it. We can't celebrate it. We can't invite it, because it is giving a false sense of what sound preaching is, and it bears itself out in pandemic time. A disproportionate way in which African Americans are being affected, and the ways and the lack of healthcare access we have. And am I still in there?
Yeah, you're good. We're gonna blame this on the devil. That's what we're gonna do. We forget technology. We're gonna blame it on the devil. As he's kind of recalibrating. Okay. All right, Bill, unmute.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening. Maybe on my end. Yeah, we can't invite it. We can't celebrate it. We can't promote it, and we have to hold it to accountability. Our people are dying. This coronavirus has just devastated and decimated our community. And when I'm still signing on and I'm still hearing, stomping on my debt and, and all kind of stuff, I could go on all day. It grieves me, because at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to hold us through pandemic times with the president we have and the political season we have coming up, the only thing that's going to hold us is preaching that has theological depth.
So there is a question. The question is, what is your approach to illustration and windows on the sermon? What is your approach to it? The process to add those into the sermon to make the sermon relevant to the Bible and the listener. What is your approach to employing illustrations?
So Dr. Sam Proctor said the best illustration is your own story first. So I always try to identify illustration from my own life first. If I cannot come up with something that is an illustration of my own experience, my first layer is to identify a theologian who wrestled with the text I am preaching and try to discover if that theologian had an illustration that I can borrow. Like I don't go on Google and put illustrations for faith and then just comb through them. I try to start with my first layer being theologians who said something about faith and see if in their writing they may have made an illustration. Jerry Carter knows, he and I talked about Renita Weems' definition of the difference between a scholar and someone else. A scholar is the person who reads who the book they're reading quoted. And a regular, interested, curious reader only reads the author they are reading. You see the distinction of what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So when one wants to be a scholar, they read the book and they're trying to get, here's how you can term it. They're trying to get back to first source connectivity. Who originated with this idea? You're reading somebody who wrote it in 2020. But if they have in that bibliography folk they have quoted, start doing the investigatory work to trace back to who was the first person who started talking about this. And then somewhere in there are illustrations that you can use. The caution of illustrations is they should never be stronger than the sermon.
Very good.
They should never take the attention away from the moves of the sermon. Illustrations are supportive. They're not dominant. So you're not writing your sermons trying to make the illustration your slam point, your shout point. This is going to kill them. No, you kill them on content. The illustration are supporting beams that help the structure to stand.
One final question from me, and then if anyone else has any questions, I think we found his Cash App somewhere, so we're going to put it in the chat. And as you know, we encourage you every week, those who get on, to sow something into those who are doing this, because nobody's asked for anything, and you can't legitimately. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you're getting at the higher levels of the academy. It's phenomenal, and so please do so. So it's been put in the Cash App now. It's been put in the chat. Please, everybody, sow something in the Dr. Curtis. Everybody, every one of us, sow something in the Dr. Curtis. What is your advice to this generation of preachers now that, because you've been preaching how long now?
32 years.
Yes.
Or
yes.
more, 30 some years.
Yes. And I remember when we first met at New Psalmist, and I did this 15-minute whatever before Dr. Thomas, and he made sure that we met each other, and we kind of built this relationship over the years. And so you are now one of the generals in terms of pastors and preachers in the country. What do you say to us? What is your words of wisdom, your words of advice to us in terms of preaching, but also in terms of us as preachers? If you could just gather all of the preachers together in the world and talk to us, what would you say?
That you have been selected, and we'll use the term called, you have been called to speak into the spiritual lives of people who will, by virtue of your call, open their entire lives to you. And they will rest every decision they make by you tipping the balance scales more weightier on the side of your gospel than any other influence in their lives.
Wow.
Knowing you have that kind of license into the lives of people, you have to take that call seriously. And you have to give your vocation the best of your time and attention. We're the most privileged people on the planet. We're the most respected people on the planet. And unfortunately, we can sometimes be the most laziest people on the planet because we let the authority and anointing make us think that covers the lack of preparation and theological integrity. Do the work. Do the work. Read everything. Write ferociously. Challenge yourself by surrounding yourself with peers where iron does truly sharpen iron, and peers that can hold you into accountability, check you when you're getting lazy, and be with you when you're in crisis. And think that every person in the pew is making their next critical life decision by what's getting ready to come out of your mouth. What decision would you want them to make?
Okay. Let me just offer, someone sent a question I think is an interesting question. And then we'll give you the opportunity to just give us a closing statement. I think that's amazing what you just said, though. Could Dr. Curtis speak a bit more to us about being okay to just lament in the space? You talked about,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, so Richard Rohr was the one who kind of turned me on to this. I've been doing these meditations with my congregation since probably the second week of the pandemic. And every morning I get up, do my devotions, and I write a meditation. And the one morning I was writing my meditation and I got so mad at God. I'm like, I literally said, John, I'm tired of faking like I am encouraged. I don't like this season. I don't like you having me in this place of ambivalence. I don't like the fact that you're making me have to be cheerful and encouraging every night 2 times so that 600 other people can be encouraged. And then I hang the phone up and I wonder, where in the world is the church going and what's happening in this world? And, you know, on and on and on. I woke up one morning, I read Richard Rohr's meditation, and in it, he talked about the need for a rediscussion around the value of the lament. And in it, he raises the issue of there are so many Psalms where it is not an expression of praise, it is not a confession of sin, it is a mourning of transitioning from one place to another. And I hung out. He says sometimes God's greatest revelation is not in getting to the place of praise, not in God speaking to you in the place of your complaint, but hanging out in the silent space of the lament. And when I hung out in the silent space of the lament, I had to then ask myself a series of other questions. That's where, John, I got to the place where I started saying, if we never go back to church, how can I eulogize what it was and celebrate whatever God is going to do in the future? What am I hearing God say that has nothing to do with going back, reopening, trying to re-engage some of the programs we have? If that never comes back, can I mourn what we're losing and then be creative and imaginative about what is to come? That's what I mean by hanging out in the lament.
Get off my Zoom. Get off my Zoom. You just put in context what this season really looks like for the church, which is, okay, I'm going to piggyback on this because you said something so incredible. We have to grieve that it has died.
Yeah. If you're going to be well.
Yep. That our concept of church. So we're at a funeral and the birthing room in the same season.
Right.
And the question is, are we comfortable burying while giving birth? Right. Or are we going to only focus on one or the other, which will ultimately make it an incomplete season?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think if we're going to be whole coming out of it, we have to be true to our emotions while we are in it. I miss my congregation.
Very good.
You hear what I'm saying to you? Like,
absolutely.
Like I've lost weight. I've gotten in better shape. I'm enjoying being off the road. I'm enjoying the reading and the praying. But I miss my church.
Yep.
Even the members who, when we were meeting every week, and I heard they weren't going to be in church that week, I was like, dang it, Jesus. I miss them too. I miss my church, man. I miss the engagement. I miss the environment, the whole thing. Yeah. So you gotta grieve because it's the only way that you can be healthy coming out of it.
I want to close with this. Bill, first of all, thank you for doing this. And everybody, his Cash App is in the chat. Please, right now, go and bless him. Say thank you for his time today. It's been absolutely amazing. You are truly one of the voices we have to hear not just in the pulpit, but in these kind of settings. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Hey man, it's true. It's true. And you know, I love you to life. So it's true. A couple of things This will be replayed on YouTube, and once we get the link, we will put it on my page, and I'll even post it on Dr. Curtis's page, so that you all can go, and you can go to Kingdom Fellowship International page, and you can watch this again as well. Every one of these, because some of you are just discovering, we've been doing this since the middle of March. Dr. Kimberly Credit, Dr. Jared Carter, Dr. Jamal Bryant, Dr. Greg Howard, Dr. Frank Thomas, Dr. Gina Stewart, Bishop Rudolph McKissick. There's been this whole list and litany of people who've been doing this since the middle of March. We kind of started it, and so here we are now with, this is our next to last week. Next week is Dr. Jeffrey Guns. We just happen to be brothers, but he's been preaching for well over 40 years. He's going to talk about how do you sustain excellence in preaching. So you can go watch all of these, and I promise you, if you watch one, you're going to be up all night watching the rest of them. So the other thing is, out of this is something that we will continue, Seminary on Sunday, and it's for 100 slots. It's 100 slots. It's 100 slots. The registration is $250 per semester. The semester will be 6 months, 6 sessions. We will work with you on sermon mechanics. We will walk with you. So I hope pastors, preachers take advantage of it. Again, Dr. John Kinney, Dr. Carolyn Knight, Dr. Jared Carter. We're trying to lock in Dr. Gina Stewart, Dr. Christopher Davis, and Dr. Claiborne Lee. And so that's the first semester. The second semester, I'm going to ask Dr. Curtis to come back, Dr. Kimberly Credit, Bishop Rudolph McKissick, and some others. And so we are building out a way of preachers staying fresh. So if you will, email us or go to the website, seminaryonsundays.com, seminaryonsundays.com, and you can register today, and we will do anything we can to make this a part. I promise you, you need to commit to this. So that's the commercial. Thursday, we will have, go back, find my page, and find the conversation on sexism in the pulpit that Dr. Curtis, Dr. Cynthia Hale, and Pastor Courtney Clayton Jenkins, yeah. She, go back and watch that from Thursday. You will be blessed by the conversation. And then on this Thursday at 8 o'clock, we're doing ageism in the pulpit. Dr. Elaine Flake, Dr. Jesse Williams, Pastor Cedric Rouson, and we're nailing down the final person. And we're going to be dealing with this whole issue of generations and the pulpit. So there's a lot going on. A lot has come out of this. I pray that you'll take advantage of it. Dr. Curtis, if you will close us out by giving us what you're reading and what you would encourage people to read. And again, you can have the final statement.
So right now, these last couple of weeks, I picked up off my shelf the White Hopkins book on understanding liberation theology. And I'm reading Peter Diamandis's book, The Future is Faster Than You Think.
Okay.
I think I mentioned earlier that my devotional material is Richard Rohr. And I'm reading a book whose author escapes me called Capital Men. And it talks about those early congressmen right out of antebellum, Black congressmen, which is a great read. So that's some of them. And I will supply to you a list of suggested reading that maybe you can put together as you're compiling from everybody you've had on as guests.
Cool. That'd be great. Any books you have?
My first one is Faith Learn Without Fear. The second one is a study of Paul's imaging of the armor. And that's Clothes for Victory. And my newest one that probably fits more this pandemic, and I'm really embarrassed that I don't, book called Mentor Shift, that spells out a lot of the things that we are presently experiencing. I am a tech guy, and I had been predicting, some might say prophesying, that we would get into this virtual space place about 10 years ago. So mentorship deals with ethical issues, technology being a major foundation and platform, but it deals with issues of gender, sexuality, ageism, classism, what it means to be African American today, where the church fits, and what's happening with technology and virtual space. And all of those are accessible on Amazon. You can download them, they're all there.
Okay, and someone just typed great book. So we want to encourage everyone to go now. So you got 3 things to do. First thing is sewing to Dr. Curtis. Second thing is to register for Seminary on Sunday. I promise you, it's going to be amazing. Third thing is to go get his books. Thank you all so much for getting on. We got one more week before we shut it down and it becomes Seminary on Sunday, a certification approach to preaching. So again, thank all of you for getting on. Dr. William H. Curtis, you are, man, thank you. You are my dude, man. Appreciate you.
My brother for life, man.
For life, and they better know it. So everybody have a great night. Enjoy yourselves. Since there's no more documentary on Jordan and the Bulls and the Last Dance have danced the last time, go to YouTube and watch all of the sessions on Seminary on Sunday. That's far better than anything you can watch ever. All right? You guys take care. Be blessed. Register today for Seminary on Sunday. I promise you it's going to be worth your time. Be blessed, everybody. So in the Dr. Curtis, it will be worth your time to do so. Take care.